Hello students, this is Mr. Holly. We're going to look at the problem set for lesson 16. And in today's work, what we're trying to do is make things as easy on ourselves as possible. These expressions look very complex, but if we use the right tools, we should be able to make them a lot easier on ourselves. So the first thing I noticed with this first expression, I noticed two things. One, I noticed that there's three negative numbers, so I know my product is going to be negative. Okay? I'm just put a little note there. I also noticed that I have decimals and fractions, so that's something we need to think about. How can I make them play nicely together? And then the third thing I noticed is that this is division, and I'm not able to apply any of the properties like the commutative property, the associative property, to division or subtraction. It doesn't work with either of those operations. So I want to be talking about multiplication and addition. That's what allows me the flexibility to move numbers around as long as I follow those rules. So I want to write this as multiplication. Negative 2.2, 2 2/10, times negative 2. And I want to change this division to multiplication by multiplying by the inverse or the reciprocal of negative 1/4, which would be negative 4 times 5. And now I've got rid of my fraction issue. I no longer have a fraction, but I still have a decimal. I want to get rid of that decimal. And if I just continue to multiply across, it could be pretty messy. But remember that if I multiply a number that has something in the tens place, the tenths place, and that place value, if I multiply it by 10, that number becomes a whole number. So if I want to take negative 2 2/10, and I'm going to actually change the order here, I want to multiply negative 2 times 5, because that's going to create 10. So I'm going to move them. I'm going to put some parentheses to show that I'm associating them together. Negative 2 2/10 times negative 10 times negative 4. Now I'm going to multiply this together. This number, instead of 2 2/10, I now have a 2 in the tens place and a 2 in the ones place. So now I have 22 times negative 4. And that's going to give me a product of negative 88. And that is our answer. Now, looking at number 2, we're going to be using the distributive property. Remember, the distributive property goes two ways. Let's write it up here so that we can just see it for a second. You can always say that A times B plus C is equal to AB plus AC. Or in the second example we're going to look at, we're going to see AB plus AC. So I have two terms. They each have the same factor A. I can factor that A out and write it as A times B plus C. So we're going to do both of these. On the first one, we're going to decompose 2 1/4 to 2 plus 1/4. We're going to multiply by negative 8. And I think most students will feel more comfortable if I wrote those in the opposite order, if I commute those numbers. So I'm going to move the negative 8 to the left and put 2 plus 1/4 to the right. And now I'm just going to multiply. Negative 8 times 2, negative 8 times 1/4. That's negative 16, plus negative 8 times 1/4 is negative 2. 8 over 4, 8 divided by 4 is 2. A negative times positive is a negative. And now if I add these together, I get negative 18. Let's go over to the B side. This is like that second example where we're using the distributive property, but what we're really doing is we are factoring. What is the common factor between both terms in B? Well, each of these terms has a factor of 2/3. 2/3 times negative 7 and 2/3 times negative 5. So if I was to remove this factor of 2/3 or factor out this 2/3, I would have 2/3 of negative 7 plus negative 5. 2/3 of negative 7 plus negative 5. Let's clean that up for you. 2/3 of negative 7 plus negative 5. Well, that would be 2/3 of negative 12 if I work inside the parentheses. Now, this becomes relatively easy. I can simplify this as we've done in the past, where I would divide this numerator and this denominator by 3, and then I get 2 times negative 4. Or we could just treat this like multiplying fractions. I'm going to multiply, I'm going to turn negative 12 into 12 over 1. Let's just multiply across. That's negative 24 over 3, and that's negative 8. And there's our answer. Okay, let's come down here and let's look. This is about a student named Mia, and she evaluates this expression. We need to find the error that she makes, and then we need to also find the correct evaluation of the expression. So if I look at this, I see 38/100 times 3 divided by negative 1 over 20 times 5 divided by negative 8. Now let's look to see what moves she makes. This stays the same. Now it's times 5, so she has she's moved this multiplication over here. That's fine. She has taken this division and she's changed it to multiplication. And she thinks that she should take this negative and make it a positive. Like change division to multiplication by making this its opposite. That sounds a lot like changing subtraction to addition. That's not our rule for changing division to multiplication. It's not the same. It doesn't matter what the rule is. It's not the same. It's not the same thing. Dividing by negative 1/20 is not the same as multiplying by positive 1/20. But dividing by 1/20 would be the same as multiplying by negative 20. That would be the same. So this is where the issue is. And if we come over here, she took divide by negative 8 and made it times negative 8. She just changed division to multiplication and did not change anything. Obviously, that's not the same. Dividing by 8 and multiplying by 8 are completely different. She could change this and say, instead of dividing by negative 8, we could multiply by the reciprocal. What would be the reciprocal of negative 8? It would be 1/8. That would work. Okay. So I would rewrite this. We need to do it correctly. So let's rewrite how it should be. This is 38/100 times 5 we can move it like that, divided by negative 1/20. So it's actually going to be times negative 20, right? To go from dividing by negative 1 over 20, well, the reciprocal would be 20 over 1. So negative 20 times 5 and divide by negative 8, well, that's the same as multiplied by negative 1/8. Okay, now we need to look for numbers that work well together. I don't see a lot of numbers that work well together. I'm trying to figure that out. This looks difficult. I've got decimals, I've got fractions. So there's really a couple ways we could probably approach this, but I'm going to show you the way that I ended up deciding on. Now, I see 5 times 20. That's 100. So I could get this to where this number was no longer a decimal. That might be the best way to do it. I could turn this into a fraction, and then I could work from there to try to continue to simplify the fraction. There's a couple different options, but let's do this. Let's go ahead and create 100. So 38/100 times negative 100 times 5 times negative 1/8. So if I multiply this out, I would get 38 times negative 100 is negative 38 times 5 times negative 1/8. Right? The next move I want to make is to do negative. I actually think it would be easier if I change the order here, I'd like to do negative 38 times negative 1/8 times 5. And I'm going to simplify. 38 and 8 have a common factor. That common factor is 2. So I could simplify this. If this is negative 38 over 1 and this is negative 1 over 8, I can change this to negative 19 over 1 and change this to 1 over negative 4, or negative 1/4. All right. Now, if I have two fractions here, I could make this a fraction as well, and we could actually just multiply across. I did several steps here in this. Maybe I should rewrite this for you. Let's come down here and just rewrite. Negative 19 over 1 times negative 1/4 times, I'm taking this 5, I'm going to write it as 5 over 1. And if I multiply across, I get 19 times 5, which is 95. It's easier than it sounds. 20 times 5 is 100. So 19 times 5 would be 5 less. It's 95. Okay? Pretty easy multiplication. 95. And obviously this is going to be 4. 1 times 4 times 1. Now let's see, I had two negatives and a positive. Those negatives cancel out, and this number should be a positive number. Now let's think. I could do this as long division. That's probably the right way to do it. Or I could think about it. I know 4 goes into 125 times. Okay, so 24 times would be 96. So it's going to go in about 23 times and some change. But we'll go ahead and do the division. 95 divided by 4. That's going to go into 9 2 times. 2 times 4 is 8. Bring this down. 2 times 15 is, 4 goes into 15 3 times. 3 times 4 is 12. 3, remember we got to add some zeros here. Bring it down to 0. And 4 will go into 30. 7 times. 7 times 4 is 28. And 4 will go into 20. 5 times. And there's our answer. 2375. So 23 and 75 hundredths is our answer. It was a little tough, but it's definitely a lot easier if we use the skills that we've learned. All right. Thanks, guys.